Hello, everyone, and welcome to PCR's April Tips and Virtual Transition Times meetings. My name is Melissa Wyman, and I am PCR's Respite Care and Community Engagement Director. I will be your moderator this evening, so please feel free to send any questions or comments in the chat box below. We are so excited to be collaborating with Montgomery County Public Schools Transition Services Unit to provide an enhanced transition times program for transitioning youth, their families, and caregivers. We are delighted to offer this presentation with American Sign Language simultaneous interpretation. We will also be offering this presentation with Spanish simultaneous interpretation. To access the Spanish interpretation, at the bottom of your screen, select Interpretation, select Spanish for the Spanish interpretation, mute original audio if you only want to hear one language. The English and Spanish language versions will be archived on the PCR website Transition Times page. Just some Zoom tip reminders. We are using the webinar platform. We will wait for questions at the end of the presentation, but feel free to submit any of your questions in the chat box below. Click Show Captions to see the captions for the webinar. You must select the speaking language you would like to show. Tonight, we are so excited to have as our presenters Shanicia Hansen, Vocational Technical Specialist for Montgomery County TY Unit, and Michael Dalto from High Note Consulting LLC. And I just wanted to let everyone know that specifically when Shanicia talks about doors, that it's focused for the transitioning youth population. All right, Shanicia.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Melissa. Hello, everyone. I am Shanicia Hansen. I am a vocational tech specialist with the State of Maryland Doors, the transition unit. I do have my colleague Taylor here as well. I'll let her go ahead and introduce herself. So tonight's presentation, as mentioned, we will be discussing doors, and that stands for Division of Rehabilitation Services. There are two services we offer here at Doors, one being the Pre-Employment Transition Services, other known as PREATS. That is for individuals ages 14 through 21. We also do have an adult services, and that is our vocational rehabilitation services. Doors. And so the Doors, what we are a state agency that offers programs and, sorry, let me move this. Program and services that help people with disabilities to go to work. The mission of Doors is to provide leadership and support in promoting the employment, economic self-sufficiency, and independence of individuals with disabilities. As stated earlier, there's two services we offer. One being the pre-employment transition services, and that is for students between the age 14 and 21. And we also have that vocational rehabilitation services. We do have another office, which is the Office of Blindness and Visual Services, other known as OBVS. That is throughout Maryland, specializes in services for people who are blind or visually impaired. Our Workforce Technology Center, WTC, that is our headquarters, and they focus on comprehensive assessment, and that is also a training facility. So we'll talk a little bit more about like what PREATS is. Again, that 14 and 22. The PREATS program, that's for students with disabilities who are seeking opportunities to enhance and explore the world of work. PREATS has 5 specific services designed to help students with disabilities identify their career interests and enhance their awareness of the world of work. PREATS are generally short-term in nature and cover introductory topics emphasizing exploration and preparation for employment and or post-secondary education. So let's just talk about the qualifications for PREATS. So in order for an individual to be qualified for PREATS, they must be enrolled in school, post-secondary education, or other recognized educational program and have not exited, graduated, or withdrawn. They must be at least age 14, but less than age 22, and have a disability documented with an IEP, 504 plan, medical records, or doctor's note. And the five categories for pre-ETS, those are job exploration counseling, work-based learning experience, counseling and opportunities for enrollment and comprehensive transition or post-secondary educational program, workplace readiness, and instruction on self-advocacy. So let's talk a little bit about student employment services. So again, the main focus for pre-ETS that I want everyone to be able to walk away with that these are specifically for individuals ages 14 to 21. So student employment services are for students with disabilities who would like to receive pre-ETS and also obtain or prepare for meaningful employment and a successful career. A broad range of vocational rehabilitation services may be available to those students. And again, this is the video. Sorry that it's still not working, but as mentioned, it has already been shared in the chat. And then for the vocational rehabilitation service, in order to be eligible for eligibility for student employment services, to be determined eligible, you must meet the definition of a student with disability, have a physical, emotional, cognitive, sensory, or learning disability that impact working, have an IEP, 504 plan, or significant health condition and need employment services to get or keep a job. Student employment services may include pre-ETS, counseling and referral, career decision making, assistance with higher education, technical or vocational training, assistive technology, assessment, job preparation, job search assistance, or on-the-job training and support, or supportive employment. General information about doors. A DOORS counselor is assigned to every public school in Maryland. Your DOORS counselor will provide and arrange DOORS services, collaborate with school, community, and workforce partners, help develop the pre-ETS agreement or the individualized plan for employment. That's other known as an IPE. Attend IEP meetings whenever possible. So as for funding, DOORS is a state and federally funded program. Both pre-ETS and student employment services will be provided without regards to consumer financial need for those students who qualify or who are eligible. And I'm taking a second to pause because the chat was popping up. Someone is saying, I don't have the link to the video. Please send the link. It can be, okay. Thank you, Margie, for responding to those. So timeline for services. A student can be referred for pre-ETS or student employment services as early as age 14. The type of services to refer for initially depends on their needs and goals. They can be referred for the other type of services in the future if they choose. There's no waiting list for pre-ETS, the pre-employment transition services. Individuals eligible for student employment services who do not have most significant disabilities are placed on a waiting list. So this is our headquarters, the Workforce and Technology Center, WTC. The services that they provide are work readiness programs, career training, academic tutoring or GED, employment services, apprenticeship, assistive technology, dormitory services, deaf and hard of hearing services, autism services, behavioral health services. So all of these services can be provided at the DOORS Workforce Technology Center. However, one must be found eligible first for our services in order to participate in any of those listed. Accessing DOORS. So there is a referral process for anyone who's seeking services from DOORS. That information too is on our public website. It is a DOORS online referral portal by contacting your local DOORS office. Both the pre-ETS and the student employment services are available on the referral. Referrals may be completed by anyone, the student, family, school staff, physician. Special education staff are encouraged to refer students for doors. However, by law, they must have a written parental consent. Okay, so there is an intake process once you apply for doors for either of the two services, the PREETS or the Student Employment Services, which is also the VR program. Once a referral is received, it will be dispatched to the appropriate staff to complete the intake process. Intake specialists include staff from Doors Eligibility Determination Unit, that's the EDU, Center for Transition and Career Innovation, CTCI, or the local Doors office. A letter will be sent from Doors explaining which office will be processing the referral. There will also be a phone call from that office. All needed forms and documentation for the intake will be outlined in that letter and call. So basically, in other terms, once a referral has been submitted on our website, it takes about 10 days for us. We will reach out within about 10 days and confirming that we received the referral and when the next once what the next steps are. We do encourage families and students to keep an eye out because the first initial contact is by mail. Qualification and eligibility. After intake meeting and receipt of all documentation, DOOR staff will determine if the student qualifies to receive PREATS as a student with disability and or is eligible for student employment services. Once qualification and or eligibility is determined, the student will receive a letter providing information about next steps. Important notes. Requesting pre-employment transition service does not make you eligible for student employment services. You must still apply and be found eligible for student employment services if interested. Youth with disabilities found eligible for student employment services can continue to receive employment services after they exit school. An individual can be referred for employment services after they have exited high school, even if they have never accessed doors services while they were a student. All right. So we are now at the end where I can take some questions. Trying to pull the chat back up so I can see what's going on. And I see Taylor where she's already. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see what's going on.
I think most of the questions were about accessing the video. I did put it in there again.
Okay, I hope now it's.
There is a question, how have the state budget cuts affected doors?
Well, full transparency, I will be honest, that's not something I'm able to talk about because that was not something I discussed with my supervisor. I will say right now we are still operating and we are still able to provide services.
Okay, next, my child finished his work-based learning experience. Now what next? I emailed my doors person, but I have not heard back.
All right. One, I want to apologize on behalf of the agency that you have not heard back from your doors counselor just yet. If you haven't done a phone call just yet, please do follow up by phone call. And the next thing, you can also find out who the supervisor is and do try to reach out to them as well. Please keep in mind, I mean, we have received an influx of like referrals and stuff. So no excuse why someone has not responded to you just yet. But if it's been quite some time and there's no response, please do reach out to the supervisor.
There is a question about SSDI. That's the second half of the presentation that we will be talking about, Social Security.
Okay. And I think that was a follow-up that was saying it is his first Weeble in high school.
Yeah.
It was for the same person.
Can you clarify the high-level differences between PREETs and student employment services in terms of what that looks like, what those services are? Great question.
Yeah, great question. Absolutely. So, weirdly, I'm not sure why it's listed as student employment services, but a vocation and rehabilitation services, VR. So if you were to look on our website, it may say the vocation and rehabilitation services. So, want to clarify that the pre-employment transition services is only for students that are in school. So once they're age 14 to 21, and they are currently enrolled in any type of educational program, they can automatically receive pre-employment transition services. And those are five specific categories. One, it is the job exploration counseling, followed by the work-based learning experience, counseling and opportunities for enrollment in higher education, self-advocacy, and I'm missing one that I don't have off top. But those are just the five specific programs that you can receive under the pre-eds program. They are a bit limited. I like to share with my families that these are more so like the internship opportunities to get an exploration of what it feels like to work before getting out there in the real world versus now the vocational rehabilitation services, the student employment services, those are where services such as assessment can be provided to test what their levels are as it relates to employments that they would like to do in the future. If they are someone who may require assistive technology, those assessments too can also be provided under the student employment services, other known as the vocational rehabilitation services. That particular program, again, as it explained in the presentation, at age 14, they are more than welcome to apply for those services as well. But at the time, whomever is completing the referral, it is up to their discretion what direction they would like to go.
Okay, another good question. How do DOORS services differ from employment services from DDA? And how do the agencies work together?
Okay, wonderful question. So, Doors Services is about vocational. We are a short-term service agency. Once an individual has been successfully employed for quite some time, Doors will close their case out, and that's where DDA will kick in. Doors and DDA are two different agencies. However, we work together very closely. Something that could be a bit tricky. Not all DDA agencies are Doors vendor. So let's say, I'm going to give two examples here. If an individual is working with an agency that is someone's working with an agency that a DDA agency that is a Doors vendor, Doors will work with them to provide the necessary job services to make sure they're employed, they're able to keep their job. Eventually, Doors will fade out of the background, and DDA will then provide those ongoing services. If an individual decides to work with an agency not provide that's not a vendor of Doors, Doors will only provide a short-term job services, and then that individual will then have to get the additional support needed from DDA.
So this, I think, what about those that are not funded by DDA? And I assume the question is, could they still be eligible for DOORS supports?
No, absolutely, because
Yeah.
Doors again, and I said Doors and DDA are two separate agencies. So yes, one does not need DDA to be eligible for Doors. And I do not work with DDA, so I'm going to say this very lightly. I think if you do have Doors, it may look good for you to maybe get accepted for DDA.
So will DOORS transfer to DDA directly, or will we apply? Do individuals have to apply for that? I think, and Shanice, correct me if I'm wrong. I think that if you have your child is eligible for DDA, you should also apply for DOORS. They will work jointly as much as possible, but DDA will then pick that up. I don't think that there needs to be another application process for that once they've been connected to both.
Yeah, one, I want to clarify. So you should apply for them individually. So yes, you have to
Yes.
apply for Doors in DDA individually. And as Pat just mentioned, that is correct.
Okay, we have a parent who says go Priyes. Daughters did an internship and was offered a position, which is lovely.
Wonderful.
Okay, I submitted an application. So this is personal, but let's see if I can generalize it. An application to February, in February, but now I'm learning I should have completed a referral form first.
Mhm. Yeah, I think I said submit
Uh,
an application to February to both emails, doors, and but now I'm learning qualified.
So here's what I would suggest is if this child is in an MCPS school, a high school, contact your transition support teacher. They can assist you in submitting that referral. That would be my take on the best way to start that process.
And
So
I will also note that since she'll be graduating in June, I would do an employment
yes.
services referral versus a pre-eds because
Okay.
once she graduates, she'll no longer be eligible for pre-ed. So it's best to do an employment service one referral.
Correct. So if
Welcome.
you submit an application, well, again, if you submit an application, a referral probably did go in. So, okay. Okay, I think she got that. If you need to know who your TST is, put it in the chat and I'll let you know. Okay, those are the only questions that I see here, folks.
Yep, I don't think I see anything else.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Do you have a contact? Or if anybody has any questions, can you guys put on the chat the best contact or the best way to reach anybody?
You're welcome. So, I mean, it does vary since we do operate, in Montgomery County, there's only one transition unit, which we're all operating now out of the Wheaton office. We do have multiple counselors with one supervisor. I want to be fair to my supervisor. I don't want to drop her email here and then there's a bunch of people just emailing her questions. So I just want to say the best route first is the intake process, completing the referral online, and then they'll get a response from that and
Okay,
what the next steps are. Once they complete the intake, something pops up and tell them this is what happens next, and someone will be in touch.
sure. But on there, like if for any reason they have any issues with that, there is a contact
Yes,
somewhere? Okay,
yes, it does say that, and they can all
okay.
they can feel free to call the Wheaton office. I can drop that number here in the chat for sure. But
Yeah, that would be helpful. Just ultimately, I know, sometimes trying to get in touch with somebody can be hard, but yeah, so this is great. Thank you so much.
no, you're certainly welcome. All right, so I'm going to put the information. I will put the office number and the office address. I mean, they are more than welcome to visit the office. They're always welcome to call and ask for a supervisor. But
Okay.
the first step, and sometimes in the office, yes, we are also able to assist with completing a referral. So if someone's having a hard time or they don't know how to use the internet or whatever the case may be, they're more than welcome to call the doors office for assistance, and we are able to assist them with completing the referral, along with our partners as well. Montgomery County Public School, the transition support teachers are amazing, and they will help the students and families.
And we work very closely together. So I do encourage you, if you have any questions, please reach out to the transition support teacher in your school. Every school has one. If you don't know who that is, put a question to me in the chat and I'll respond to that. But it's also on the MCPS Transition Services webpage. We have a staff listing right there with email addresses for all of our transition support teachers. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Next we have
Yeah.
the unbelievable, amazing Michael Dottel.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I'm
Yes.
going to share my screen here.
Okay, perfect. I will spotlight you.
All right, is that visible?
Yes, it is.
Okay, wonderful. So some years ago, my mother summoned my brothers and me and told us she had something very important to discuss with her. So we gathered in her kitchen and she announced that her eye doctor had diagnosed her with glaucoma. She said it was a very serious kind that could cause her to wake up one morning and just be totally blind. But she said the good news is the doctor told her that there's a laser surgery that can fix it completely, and the success rate for the surgery was very high. But she said it's surgery, and no surgery is 100% guaranteed. And so she wanted to think of a backup plan if necessary. And she'd been doing a little bit of research into alternative treatments for glaucoma. And I interrupted her and I said, Mom, are you trying to get us to score you some pot? And she looked at me and said, Well, who else am I going to ask? So, fortunately for my mother, the laser surgery was successful. She's never had a problem with glaucoma since, and I never had to be a mule for my mother. But what that story tells you is that advanced planning is in my blood. And if you're attending this webinar this evening, it's probably in yours as well. And if you have a family member who's receiving SSI, or if you're really an advanced planner, one who is not yet receiving it, but maybe planning to apply or has already applied, and you're wondering what happens if your family member with SSI goes to work, then you're in the right place. That's what we'll be talking about. Now, before I launch into this, I want to say I know we already got a question in the chat about SSDI. That's a different benefit that's not the subject of my presentation, but we should have time for me to answer questions about SSDI as well. But I'm going to be focused on SSI and how work affects it. So, who is eligible for SSI, which stands for Supplemental Security Income? Well, to be eligible for it, you have to have a severe disability or be at least age 65, even if you're not disabled. But obviously, for our purposes, we're focusing on people who are disabled. A person could potentially be any age and still be eligible for SSI. But for reasons we'll get to, it's more common for adults than for children to receive SSI. You also must be a US citizen or an immigrant who meets certain requirements and is documented. The requirements are rather detailed. I won't go into them right now. Uh, the requirements for non-citizens. And you have to not have much money. You have to have income and resources or assets below certain limits. So for our purposes, we're going to be focusing on people who get SSI because they have a severe disability and they don't have much money. Now, the third slide here, or excuse me, the third bullet point begs a question, which is, what's the difference between income and resources? And I'm going to give you what I hope will be a very clear distinction. I have a trainer friend who likes to say, income is what you get and resources are what you got. So if you receive money during a calendar month, that's going to be income, and that's going to be subject to an income limit. Now, if you have any of that money left over that you haven't spent by the end of the month, and you still have some of that money left over when the first day of the next calendar month begins, that leftover amount becomes a resource, and it remains a resource for as long as you have it. And that's subject to a different limit on resources. So it's income the month you get it, and any amount you still have following into the first day of the next month becomes a resource. So how disabled does a person need to be to qualify for SSI? For an adult, 18 or older, they have to have a severe disability. It has to have lasted or be expected to last at least a year, or it has to be a terminal illness. And it has to limit the person's ability to work. Notice I did not say it has to prevent the person from working. There is a common myth perpetuated by many people who should know better, including some at Social Security, that if you're capable of working, let alone if you're already working, you're not eligible for SSI. Absolutely not true. Totally false. You can be capable of working. You can even be working the entire time you're in the SSI application process and still be eligible for SSI. But your disability does have to limit your ability to work. And Social Security says your disability has to prevent you from doing substantial work. The term they use is actually even longer, because one rule for Social Security is never use one syllable if nine would do just as well. The term they use is substantial gainful activity, SGA for short. Now, generally, SGA is earnings of at least $1,690 a month before taxes are taken out. This year in 2026, that amount goes up generally every January. And in some cases, a person's earnings could be even higher than that, and they could still be initially eligible for SSI. But anyway, that number may surprise you. Many people are really caught off guard to think that a person could be earning that much and still be eligible for SSI. Now, a blind person, because they have the best lobby, has some advantages over anybody who's not blind. And one of the advantages in the programs is that substantial work requirement does not apply to a blind person. They can be earning well over $1,690 a month and still be eligible for SSI. But they'd have to meet Social Security's standard of blindness. And that is the vision in the person's better eye with correction is no better than 20 over 200, or their field of vision is no greater than 20 degrees. So what's the limit on income, on money that you receive during the given month? That depends on the kind of income the person gets. The SSI program divides income into three kinds. There are some kinds that don't count at all. And examples would be SSI benefits themselves don't count as income, food stamps, income tax refunds, AmeriCorps stipends, and a variety of others. But other than the handful of types of income that don't count at all, what remains are two other kinds called unearned income and earned income. So what's the difference? Earned income is going to be money that a person received as direct compensation for work they did. That could be wages, salaries, tips, self-employment income, royalties if they sell a book or a movie script, things like that, direct compensation for work performed. And unearned income is basically anything else. Social Security benefits, pensions, annuities, interest, dividends, workers' compensation, unemployment benefits, veterans benefits, and a host of others. So the first thing to do is figure out what kind of other income do you have besides SSI and see how much of it counts against the income limit. Now, if a person besides SSI has only unearned income, let's say they have a pension or a Social Security benefit, their unearned income generally has to be less than $1,014 a month in order to be eligible for any SSI. Now, if the person has only earned income, like wages or self-employment income, and if they've already been approved for SSI, so they were not doing substantial work when they applied, now they're getting benefits, then they could earn more. Their earnings would have to be less than $2,073 a month before taxes are taken out, and they could still be eligible for at least a little bit of SSI. Now, sometimes a person may have both kinds of income, earned and unearned. It's too late in the evening to do math. I'm not going to burden you with that, but there is a formula that can be used to calculate how much a person could have of each if they were receiving both unearned and earned income. Then let's talk about resources again. So remember, resources are what's left over of income, money that was received during a calendar month, what's left over when the next calendar month begins. And the limit on resources is only $2,000. That's the bad news. But there's good news as well. And the good news is not all types of resources count against that limit, but most kinds do. Examples of types of resources that count against the $2,000 limit would be cash, bank accounts, stocks, bonds, money markets, other types of investments, whole life insurance, the kind that has a cash value without somebody having to pass away, retirement accounts, property other than the home the person lives in. Those are all examples of resources that do count against the $2,000 limit. But more importantly, there are some ways that a person can have more than $2,000 in resources and still get SSI because some resources don't count against that limit. Number one, the home the person lives in, even if they own it free and clear with no mortgage and it's worth $1 million, as long as the person lives in that home, it does not count as a resource. Neither does one motor vehicle they own. So it's nice to know that you can own a home and a car and still get SSI. Life insurance that has no cash value doesn't count because a person can't get any money out of it without passing away. That's generally called term life insurance. Certain burial funds don't count. And then three that I'll put a little bit of focus on here. Special needs trusts. I know this is a topic many of you are familiar with, and PCR has hosted presentations on it before. These are special accounts that are set up to benefit a person with a disability, but the money in the special account does not count against the resource limit for SSI. But the person with a disability who the trust is set up for does not technically own the money and they don't control it. Another party called the trustee is the only one who's allowed to manage money in the trust and make withdrawals. They can only withdraw money to benefit the person with a disability, but the trustee has sole discretion about how that money is spent to benefit the person with a disability. So that's a nice loophole for somebody to be able to have way more than $2,000. You could have millions of dollars in a special needs trust and still be eligible for SSI. Then there's property used for a job or business. So tools, real estate, equipment, computers, etc., used for a job or business would not count against the limit. Even business bank accounts, which should be titled in the name of the business, not the individual, to distinguish it from their personal resources. But if they have a business bank account with the business name on it, that would not count against the $2,000 limit. And last but not least, my favorite loophole here is an ABLE account. If you're not familiar with ABLE accounts, pay attention over the next few slides and you may want to learn more about them. They're a great way for a person with a disability to save and receive from others way more than $2,000 and still qualify for SSI. The first $100,000 saved in an ABLE account does not count against the $2,000 resource limit for SSI. So a bit more detail about ABLE accounts. I have to apologize. I did not update an age number on slide 6. I'm going to go ahead and correct that. But in order to own an ABLE account, a person has to have a significant disability that began before a particular age. Now, until January 1st of 2026, that age was 26, as this slide indicates. However, Congress passed a law that took effect January 1st, 2026, that said a person's disability had to begin before age 46 for them to be able to own an ABLE account. So people who became disabled somewhat later in life can now qualify for ABLE accounts. But I don't believe that that will be affecting just about anybody on this call, since I know your family members are younger, significantly younger than 46. So as I mentioned, the first $100,000 in the ABLE account does not count as a resource for SSI and the medical benefit that comes along with SSI that we'll talk about momentarily. There is a limit on how much money can go into a person's ABLE account during the year. Now, anybody can contribute to a person's ABLE account. The person with a disability who owns the account, family, friends, agencies, even strangers. I've known some people who had sort of GoFundMe pages and said, please give money to my ABLE account. I don't know how much money they got, but I think it took some chutzpah to put themselves out there that way. But there is a limit on total contributions to any one ABLE account in a year. And this year in 2026, the usual contribution limit, total contributions from everybody contributing combined, is no more than $20,000. There is an exception, however. If that $20,000 contribution limit is reached before the end of the year, and the person with a disability who owns the account is working for pay, and they do not have a retirement account, like an IRA or a 401k, then the person with the disability, but only the person with the disability who owns the account, is allowed to contribute extra. They could contribute up to over $15,000 more during the year, but not more than the amount of income they're receiving from work. So in some cases, particularly if a person is working and doesn't have a retirement account, their ABLE account could potentially receive over $35,000 in contributions in a year. So once the money is in the ABLE account, it can be used to pay for a broad variety of kinds of expenses. It can pay for housing, food, clothing, other ordinary living expenses, education, transportation, employment training and support, assistive technology, health, prevention and wellness, financial management, legal fees, whole host of expenses, even including funeral and burial expenses, which obviously would be the last expense paid for. Now, if you've ever listened to a presentation about ABLE accounts given at a national level, they might have said, one thing you have to worry about with an ABLE account is if there's any money left in it when the account owner, the person with a disability, dies, the state can claim it. And that is true in most states, but not in Maryland. Maryland passed a law some years ago that said, we're not going to take money that remains in a person's ABLE account when they die, so it could be left to their heirs. With an exception, if the person received long-term care services funded by Medicaid at or after age 55. But I'm assuming your family members are a long way off from having to worry about that rule. There's also a tax break for contributions to an ABLE account in Maryland. So if you're a Maryland resident and you contribute to either your own Maryland ABLE account or another Maryland person's residence ABLE account, you can deduct on your Maryland income taxes your contributions up to $2,500 a year on your Maryland state income tax. Now, that's a tax deduction, not a tax credit. So it won't save you $2,500 in taxes, but it'll probably save you several hundred in taxes, better than nothing. Now, when you open an ABLE account, you have a choice of different investment options, from very safe but very low return, like savings accounts, to more aggressive, where there's the possibility of losing money, but also long-term, the very great likelihood you'd gain a lot more money, involving stocks and bonds and things like that. And for more information about Maryland ABLE accounts, you can go to marylandable.org. And I spent several slides on this because it's really important. That $2,000 resource limit is pathetic. It has not been increased in decades. And although Congress regularly entertains bills that would increase that limit, they never pass. So an ABLE account is a great way for a person on SSI or a person applying for SSI to be able to save and receive a lot more than $2,000 and still get SSI. So what's the most SSI a person can receive? If they're not married and they live in Maryland this year, the maximum is just under $1,000 a month, $994. Now, for an adult age 18 or older to receive that much, they have to be paying at least a little bit for their own housing. They have to be paying an amount that's equal to 1/3 of the maximum benefit plus $20. So if you take $994, take 1/3 of that, you get $331.33. Add $20 to that, that gives you $351.33 a month. That's all you have to pay for your housing in order to be able to get the maximum SSI. And certainly in the year 2026, $351 and change is nowhere near the market value of a person's housing. Now, if a person does not pay for their housing at all, the most SSI they can get is cut by 1/3. Most they could get is only $662.67. So if you have a family member who's getting SSI or applying for SSI and they live with you, you want to have a simple rental agreement and charge them at least $351.33 a month for housing so that they can get the maximum SSI. So if a person has other income besides SSI, they will generally receive less than the maximum. The objective, the purpose of the SSI program is to make sure that eligible people have at least a basic minimum amount of income to pay for living expenses, particularly housing. Now, a person can certainly pay a lot more than $351.33 a month for their housing. That's only the minimum that they have to pay. So when you think about the purpose, make sure a person who's eligible has at least a basic minimum amount of income. Then there's a logic to the program. And the logic is, well, if you don't have any other income, then ordinarily you'd expect you'd be able to get the maximum SSI, $994 a month, which is usually the case. If you did have other income, you might expect that you would get less SSI because you don't need as much to meet that basic minimum income standard. So there's a relationship between SSI and other income. As other income goes up, SSI goes down. As other income goes down, SSI goes up. So the relationship between other income and SSI is like a balance or a scale or a seesaw. One side goes up, the other goes down. So this is a popular topic regarding SSI. Families ask me all the time, $994 is not a lot of money. That does not cover most people's, even their basic living expenses for a month. Is there a way that I can supplement the income of my family member who gets SSI so that they'll have more money to pay for their basic living expenses? And the answer is there is, but you have to do it in a particular way. You don't want to give your family member on SSI money because if you do, that will cause their SSI to be reduced almost dollar for dollar. That would defeat the purpose of giving them money. But here's another great loophole involving an ABLE account. If you put money directly into your family member's ABLE account, it does not count as income against their SSI. It will not reduce their SSI. And they're allowed to use the money in their ABLE account to pay for food, shelter, clothing, other ordinary living expenses, and that won't affect their SSI payment either. So it's a great way to be able to supplement your family member's income without affecting their SSI. So SSI is a cash benefit. It comes along with a medical benefit, which is known as Medicaid. It also has another name called medical assistance. See, one rule for bureaucrats trying to confuse the public is give some benefits more than one name, keeps everyone off balance. In the state of Maryland, Medicaid is also known as medical assistance. Generically, it's called Medicaid in every state, but some states that like to confuse people give it a second name. And in Maryland, it's also called medical assistance. Medical assistance, very helpful health insurance. If a person has no other insurance, it covers pretty much all the medical expenses you would expect health insurance to cover. It even pays for certain services that people with disabilities need that other insurance will rarely, if ever, cover. Those of you who are seeking or receiving services from the Developmental Disabilities Administration, DDA, for example, well, medical assistance, Medicaid, pays for those services as well. Other insurance does not. Medical assistance costs virtually nothing. In the state of Maryland, the only medical expense that a person has to pay co-pays for is for prescriptions. And as this slide indicates, the co-pays are minimal, just $3 or so for name brand drugs and $1 or so for generics. Now, it can be challenging to find healthcare providers who accept Medicaid, medical assistance, but they are out there, and there are plenty in Montgomery County. Another thing medical assistance can do is supplement other insurance. It may cover some expenses that other insurance does not. And you are allowed to have medical assistance in addition to other insurance. Okay. Now, a person is eligible in the state of Maryland for medical assistance automatically if they get any amount of SSI, even the minimum $1 a month. All right, I'm going to pause for a moment before we get into what happens if you get SSI and go to work. And I'll entertain a handful of questions. If anyone can read them to me, please.
Sorry, I have them here. All right, I'm going to start up at the top.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and this is a lengthy one and it's personal. You know, we like general ones, but actually I think this is really important for people to hear.
Okay.
My 29-year-old child receives SSI and has a part-time job about 4 hours a week. Wages are reported each month online and everything was okay, but hours were cut back to 0 hours beginning in December. The online assist system does not allow $0 entries. So the parent here calls SSA each month to verbally report the zero amount. They received a letter from SSA warning them that if they do not report wages into the PIE system, PIE, then there will be, some kind of a consequence. So he's wondering how to resolve this with SSA to assure that it, corresponds with his SSI benefit called work. They may be able to have him work a little bit soon, but not currently. So anyway, how do they deal with this situation is a question.
Okay. Excellent question. I don't have the time to give you an adequately thorough answer. Um, but what I will say is that there are a number of different ways to report earnings to Social Security if you or your family member receive SSI and are working. The PIE system is one of them. It's not a highly favored one in my experience, but there are others as well. Initially, when you start working, you need to report that to Social Security either by calling them, sending them a letter. Um, Probably that's about it. In the past, you could go and visit the office, but that's generally not recommended now since the pandemic, going in person. But after you've reported the new job initially, then you've got a choice of a handful of different ways to report earnings, which should be reported each month. One is an online My Social Security account. If you go to the Social Security website, ssa.gov, right on the home page, there's a link to be able to open a My Social Security account. Once that account is open, you can report earnings online using that account. You can report through an automated telephone system with automated prompts. There's a mobile app for reporting earnings for SSI. You can submit pay stubs each month, generally by mail or by fax if the office allows that. Some offices will even send you envelopes, particularly bright colored envelopes to submit your pay stubs to them each month. So you have a variety of options. So what I would say is if one option is not working because, for example, the system will not accept a wage report of zero, then you could try one of the other options. Now, another possibility would be to go ahead and use the system and instead of reporting zero, report $1. $1 of earned income will actually not reduce SSI. So if the system allows you to report $1, even though it won't allow you to report zero, that $1 of reported earnings will not reduce the SSI, but it'll allow you to get past that glitch of the system not allowing a report of zero. Okay, great question. And others, Pat?
Um, just real quick, Michael, because
Yeah,
there's
Melissa.
some question in the chat that said, when I have contacted SSA, they have said not to enter $1 in wages. Do you know why that could be?
I do not know why that would be, because in practical effect, uh, actually, if you enter earned income or wages of any amount up to $65 a month because of the SSI calculation, that will not reduce the SSI payment. So I don't know why they would tell you that you're not allowed to report a
Okay.
dollar of earnings. Um, that mystifies me. Doesn't shock me. Nothing shocks me that they do.
Yes. Well, someone said a letter explaining the situation works just fine. I think she went through the situation and they're saying you need to contact the local SSA office, not the national number. And the letter basically says that they did not earn wages that month. This is what I do, and it has worked for my son.
Very good. Thank
So,
you for that advice. And yes, I do recommend contacting the local Social Security office rather than the national toll-free number. Absolutely. Okay.
And I will say, just applying for Medicare for myself, going to the local, at least the Rockville office, and submitting a letter there is very easy. You walk in the front door, there's somebody at the desk to assist you. You fill out an envelope they have right there, and you place it in the mailbox, and you get a response in not too many days. So I have found that to be very helpful. Okay. This, I think, is a misunderstanding, but I wanted to just state it. How many hours are allowed to work a month and still have that $2,000 in the account and keep that S aside? That would really depend upon how much the individual is being made per hour, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
And I think I'll be um, providing information that should answer that question in the coming slides when we talk about the impact of work on SSI. But I do think it's a good opportunity to repeat the difference between income and resources. So if a person is working for pay, they're getting paychecks, the money that they receive from their paychecks will count as income in the months that they receive the paychecks. So if you get two paychecks in a month covering 4 weeks worth of work, the money, the gross wages you received in those two paychecks in that month will count as income. And that's going to be subject to the income limit. Now, if you spent all of that money, everything you received from those paychecks before the end of the month, none of that money would be a resource. And that means none of it would count against the $2,000 resource limit. But if you only spent some of it and you saved some of it, let's say you earned $2,000 and you saved half of it, you had $1,000 that you still had when the next month began, that $1,000 that carried into the next month would become a resource. And that would be subject to the $2,000 resource limit. So the $2,000 limit does not apply to money the month you receive it. In that month, it's income, not a resource. Okay,
Okay. Next, is money in a Maryland 529 exempt?
good question. 529 plan is a type of college savings plan. And generally, when you set up a college savings plan for a family member, you, the parent, grandparent, whatever your relationship is, you are technically the owner of that account. And if it's your child who you open the account to benefit, who receives SSI, that 529 plan does not count as a resource for your child because it's not their money at this point. Now, once they begin to use that money, if they go to college and you're withdrawing money and spending it on their educational expenses, to the extent that it's spent on educational expenses, that will not count as income to them, and it won't affect their SSI either. Okay,
Okay.
let's take
More.
maybe a couple more, Pat, and then I'll
Okay.
get to work.
For unearned income, you listed examples of Social Security and pensions. You said a pension the individual earned. Would the income still be unearned if it was survivor benefits from a parent's pension?
Yes. So The term unearned, in my opinion, is unfortunate. I wish they didn't use the term unearned because it sounds negative. Um, Oftentimes there are benefits that people definitely worked in order to earn. I mean, when you receive a pension, it's generally because you worked for a period of years and you earned that money, but it's still considered unearned income simply because it's not direct compensation for work performed. So only direct compensation for work performed, like wages, self-employment, salaries, tips, etc. Only that kind of income is considered earned. Everything else is unearned. I'll tell you the worst example of the unfortunate term unearned that I've experienced was the first time I worked with a disabled veteran who was receiving a benefit called VA disability compensation. That's a cash benefit that a veteran can get if they were disabled during active duty. The SSI program considers that unearned income. But you can bet I was not going to tell that veteran that that was unearned. Next question.
Okay, if you put more than $5,000 into your child's ABLE account, can each parent take a $2,500 deduction, that $2,500 deduction?
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked that question. Yes, if a married couple contributes $5,000 or more in a year to their child's Maryland ABLE account, they can get a combined deduction of $5,000 on their Maryland income tax. And if they're filing a joint tax return, that's how that would play out. Now, if both parents were single or divorced, and they each contributed at least $2,500, they could each deduct $2,500 on their separate Maryland income tax returns. Good question.
So an individual has SSDI and SSI, has received a housing waiver, but they only allow him to spend $29 for rent. This is much less than the 351 that's needed. How does that work?
Okay. I'm going to hold off on answering that question until later. That's really going off in a different direction um, than this
Yes.
presentation. However, if I have time, I will answer it before we finish. And Melissa, would you like me to answer any questions that I don't get to this evening? Um, so that those can be emailed out to everyone, or
Yeah, that would be
does that
great.
work? Okay, great.
Yeah,
So that way I can answer every question,
great.
even
Okay.
though we don't have time for it during the session.
Yes, and that's also a good reminder too. What I can also do is I will, because you have done a lot of Q and A's for us, so
Mhm.
I kind of can get them together because everybody can kind of take a look, at them.
Okay, wonderful.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm not able to see my clock with my full screen here. Can anyone
750.
tell me 7:50? Okay.
Yeah,
And we've got until 8:30?
correct.
Okay, great. And we've got plenty of time to finish this up and answer more questions. So, if you receive SSI and you go to work, it can be a frightening prospect, especially if you've just fairly recently begun to receive SSI, or your family member has, and you really don't know what to expect. But luckily, there are safety nets in the SSI program for people to work, and those are known as work incentives that limit the impact of work on SSI and Medicaid, also known as medical assistance. And I want to talk about some of them right now. So the first safety net, the first work incentive, is very simple, and that is you're always better off working than not working. if you get SSI. You will have more money. And you might wonder, well, how is that possible? I explained that if you have other income and it goes up, your SSI goes down, or the logic of the program. And that is true. But the reason you have more money if you work than if you don't work is when you work, although your SSI is reduced, it's not cut dollar for dollar. It's cut by less than half the amount you're earning from work. And as a result, the amount of SSI you lose is much more than offset by the amount of work income you gain. For example, let's say a person starts out with a maximum SSI of $994 in a month. And they start working, and their hours and their wages gradually increase. How much money can they earn and still keep at minimum $1 of SSI? They could earn up to $2,072 a month in gross wages and still get $1 of SSI. So is that person better off working? You bet they are. Not working, they had only $994. Working, they've got $2,073, $2,072 in wages plus $1 of SSI. Even if the person has to pay some taxes on those wages, what they'll have left, even after tax, will be way more than $994 a month. So that's the first safety net. The SSI program is designed to make sure that when you're working, you'll have more money. Even though your SSI goes down, your net income goes up. So I wanted to show you this graphically. So I'm saying if you get SSI, you're going to have more money if you work than if you don't work. And secondly, the more you earn from work, the more income you'll have, the more net income you'll have. So let's use an example with Marshawn, who started out getting only the maximum SSI of $994 a month. He started working 15 hours a week at the state minimum wage. I'm sorry, I should have boosted that hourly wage a bit for a Montgomery County audience, but humor me here. Minimum wage in Montgomery County being greater than $15 an hour. So he started out working 15 hours a week, then boosted that to 25 hours a week, and finally full-time, 40 hours a week. And the next slide is a bar graph that will show you his net income. What you see in blue represents the SSI. What you see in orange or pink or whatever other color appears on your screen, those are his wages after taxes. I estimated how much tax he would pay on wages at each level, and I subtracted the taxes so that this bar graph would depict Marshawn's true net income after taxes. Now, in the first bar, this is when he's not working and he's getting only SSI. You see nothing but blue. That's all SSI. That's just a hair less than $1,000. The second bar, he's working 15 hours a week. And you can see, yes, his SSI was substantially cut almost in half. But when you add his part-time wages, even after taxes, on top of that reduced SSI, he's got a lot more money. Looks like over $1,400 a month. And the third scenario, when he's working 25 hours a week, the SSI in blue is greatly reduced. Now it's uh, under $250 a month, but adding the after-tax wages on top of that, he's well over $1,600 a month. And finally, working full-time, he's earning enough from work that he doesn't get any SSI payment at all. The blue SSI is gone. But even without any SSI, with just his full-time wages, and even after taxes, he's got much more money in the neighborhood of $2,200 a month. So you're better off working than not working when you get SSI. And the more money you earn, the more money you will have. Now, the second safety net is that there are some additional work incentives that can let you keep more SSI when you're working than you ordinarily would. The first one is just for students who are not yet 22 years old. So this is very important for those of you who have students who are still in school or in high school or college or a vocational training program, a trade or technical school, job training course. If they're not yet 22 years old, they're in school and they're getting SSI, they can use this work incentive called the Student Earned Income Exclusion. And it simply says, we're not going to count the first $9,730 a year that you earn in gross wages and before tax work income. And that money will not reduce your SSI at all. That $9,730 a year figure goes up each year. Now, frankly, I don't know any students, particularly full-time students, who have time to earn more than $9,730 in a year. Every student I know is earning less than that, which means those students can earn whatever they're capable of, whatever they have time for, and still keep their maximum SSI. So their bar graph could look something like this. Suppose a student is working 10 hours a week in, after school job or weekend job and making $15 an hour. They can keep the full SSI of $994 a month and get their wages in addition to that. This is smart public policy. There are any number of studies that show if a young person, particularly in their teens, very early 20s, gets paid work experience, they're much more likely to work as adults. And in the long run, they'll be less dependent on SSI. So this is an incentive for young people to work by letting them keep their full SSI while they're working as students, in the hope that they'll develop good work habits and work as adults. And in the long run, not rely as much on the SSI program. Suppose you're not a student any longer, or you're age 22 or older. You can't use that student earned income exclusion, but there are 3 other work incentives you could potentially use, depending on your circumstances. One is called impairment-related work expenses. That one means that you're working for pay, and there are expenses that you need to pay for because of your disability that you need to pay for at least partly for work. Examples could be medical expenses, prescription copays, therapy, uh, assistive technology, attendant care to prepare for work, um, a wheelchair ramp to get in and out of your house so you can go to work, transportation needed because of a disability, accessible transportation, maybe metro access, um, adapting a vehicle to accommodate a physical disability, um, being given rides to and from work because your disability prevents you from driving. Um, if you pay for any of those kinds of expenses and others, they can be deducted from your income to keep your SSI payments higher to help offset those out-of-pocket costs. If a person is blind, another advantage, thanks to their lobby, is that they can deduct from their income almost any work-related expense, even if it has nothing to do with blindness. That even includes taxes withheld from their pay and the cost of meals that they eat on the job. Those are deducted from their work income and let them keep even more SSI than impairment-related work expenses do. And finally, there's a work incentive called PASS. That stands for Plan to Achieve Self-Support. That's basically an agreement with Social Security in a long written form that sets out a work goal. I want to work full-time as a bookkeeper, or I want to be a self-employed choreographer, or whatever it might be, lays out the steps needed to achieve that goal, and details expenses the person needs to pay for to reach that goal. And those expenses could be almost anything needed to achieve the goal: education, training, tools, equipment, uniforms, computers, transportation, even buying a car, um, childcare if you have a child and need to pay for childcare to be able to participate in education or to work. Um, Wide variety of kinds of expenses. When you pay for those expenses with the PASS plan, you get to keep more SSI to offset the costs. And that brings us to the third safety net, which is by far my favorite. This is a rule called 1619B, and I'm going to tell you exactly who 1619B was designed for. It's designed for someone like Marshawn in the earlier example in the fourth column here, when he was working full-time and earning enough money from work to reduce his SSI to zero. Now, when you saw that column earlier, you might have thought, well, I can see Marshawn has more money working full-time, but his SSI went down to zero. What will happen to his Medicaid, his medical assistance, if his SSI stops? And you might have wondered further, what happens if Marshawn doesn't keep the job? If he stops working for some reason, can he get SSI back? Does he have to reapply from scratch and start all over to get it back? And that's where the 1619B rule comes in. 1619B is basically a double safety net. Here's what it says. If a person's earnings rise high enough that they reduce their SSI to zero, 1619B lets them stay eligible for SSI. And you might wonder, well, what good is SSI if you're getting zero SSI payments? And that's where the double safety net comes in. By remaining eligible for SSI, you keep your Medicaid, your medical assistance, and If something happens to your earnings later for any reason, you stop work or your earnings drop low enough, even if you just quit, you can get right back on SSI payments just by contacting Social Security. You don't have to reapply and start over. And there is no time limit to the 1619B rule. You could start working full time, have your SSI payments go down to zero, and years later, you can stop working, go right back on getting SSI payments, and you can keep the Medicaid, the medical assistance, the entire time. 1619B means you have nothing to lose working full time. You'll keep your medical benefit and you can get right back on SSI if something happens to your earnings later. There are a few conditions you have to meet to qualify for 1619B. First, it had to be your earnings from work that reduced your SSI to zero. Your work earnings generally have to be below a certain threshold that goes up each year. And in Maryland this year, that threshold is just under $63,000. Most people on SSI don't earn that much money. But even if a person is able to earn more than that, if they have high medical expenses or expenses covered by Medicaid, including if they're getting services from DDA, they can earn an even higher amount and still qualify for 1619B. But they have to be otherwise eligible for SSI. They can't have too much unearned income. They can't have more than $2,000 in countable resources. They have to continue to need Medicaid. They just use it once a year. That satisfactorily meets that requirement. And there can't be other reasons that their SSI stopped besides their earnings. So not a very demanding list of criteria. So I like to end with that work incentive because it tells you if your family member is getting SSI and you're concerned about them working full time, you don't need to be. You've got this protection. Now, because I thought I would have less time than I actually do, I left off a slide that I ordinarily include, but I'm going to mention this to you, and you may want to take notes on this. You have learned just enough to not be dangerous, but how can you get help to navigate these work incentives, these safety nets, when your family member is actually working? How can you interact with Social Security to make sure that they let you use these work incentives? You can get free expert help from a benefits counselor who's trained and certified to specialize in these rules. You can do it either of two ways. If your family member has a case open with doors, as you learned about in the first part of the webinar, doors can provide benefits counseling. They can pay one of these certified benefits counselors to advise your family member and you. If your family member does not have a case open with doors, then you can call this number to be referred to an agency that will provide you with free benefits counseling. The number is 866-968-7842. I'll repeat that, 866-968-7842. If your family member is getting SSI or SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance, which we haven't discussed yet, and they're either working or actively seeking work, then they should be able to get free benefits counseling by contacting that number. Okay. And looks like we've got about 18 minutes for more questions. Pat, if you'd like to throw
Sorry, I
some
had to
more.
unmute myself.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm going to stop back from the bottom up so that we hit the ones that are from this most recent part. Um, let's see. What about ticket to work? What is the relationship of ticket to work and SSI? How does a person with disabilities get that ticket to work?
Yeah. The ticket to work was originally intended to be like a voucher system for people to get help to get and keep employment. It enabled a person to get services without having to pay for them from an agency that would get payments from Social Security to give the person support for employment. It does not really work out that way. Um, the ticket to work is something that if you open a case with doors, doors will be able to use the ticket to work so that if the person getting SSI or SSDI and getting services from doors ends up working 9 months at a certain earnings level, doors will be able to bill Social Security for all the costs they spent on that person's vocational rehabilitation when their case was open. So doors can get all that money back. If your family member does not have a case open with doors, or if their case with doors has been closed, they went to work successfully and doors closed their case, they could assign their ticket to work to another organization known as an employment network that could potentially provide them with support to continue working. But it doesn't work generally as an effective funding source for employment support, particularly if the person is not working to begin with, because the agency doesn't get any money through the ticket to work until the individual is working at a particular earnings level. So the ticket to work is something that most people have heard that term, but unfortunately, it doesn't hold out as much power as it might have if it had been better designed.
Okay, if SSI goes down to zero, does the 1619B go into effect automatically, or do you have to submit a form?
Great question. Um, there are many things that are supposed to happen automatically with Social Security that don't necessarily. 1619B can be one of them. Now, if you're reporting your earnings and you're fortunate and Social Security realizes, oh, you've got enough earnings to reduce your SSI to zero. Let's make sure you're eligible for 1619B and we'll put you in that status. Then it could happen automatically, but you can't count on it. It doesn't always happen. This is why I recommend getting a benefits counselor so that you can be sure you get to take advantage of these work incentives, especially 1619B, if they don't happen automatically. So thank you for that question.
Okay, I think this is just some confusion. Does receiving DDA benefits qualify for needing Medicaid?
Um, Actually, it does. If you are receiving DDA funded services, and they are being funded by Medicaid, which they almost always are. Well, not almost always, but the vast majority of the time, when somebody gets services from DDA, they have Medicaid and Medicaid is paying for those services. That would show that they needed Medicaid. So yes.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to go back to the questions prior to this section. This one was written in Spanish. I think it may be about a child, family looking for SSI benefits. What is the total income for a family of three to qualify for SSI benefits?
I would like to ask the questioner if you can stick around for a few extra minutes at 8:30, and I'm going to pull up a spreadsheet that is used. Now, I'm assuming that the person getting SSI, the family member getting SSI, is a child under age 18. And if that's the case, then I'm going to show you this calculation sheet that'll give you an idea about how much income the parents can have and have the child still eligible for SSI. This is an issue I hadn't addressed up until now. I've focused entirely on SSI for adults who are 18 or older. When an adult who's 18 or older applies for or receives SSI, unless they're married, only their own income and resources are counted for SSI. If the person getting SSI is a child under age 18, then not only does their own income and resources count, but also a portion of their parents' money will count as if it belonged to the child. That counting a portion of the parent's income and resources is called deeming. And most children don't qualify for SSI when they're under 18 because their parents have too much money. But once they turn 18, only their own money counts, and that's when they can qualify. So if your child is under 18 but has a severe disability, then when they turn 18, one of your 18th birthday gifts to them should be an SSI application. That's when they'll likely be eligible. But what I'll be happy to do just for the questioner is show you this this chart and give you a couple of examples of scenarios with a family of three, so you can determine. I won't be asking you anything about your own income or resources, but it'll give you an idea of how high the family income could be and have your child still qualify for at least some SSI, and with it, the Medicaid or medical assistance.
I think we will need an interpreter to stay for a few minutes as well because that was written in Spanish.
Okay.
Okay, next question. If an individual receives a full SSI amount each month because they are paying rent at a group home, but they receive a housing voucher that pays 100% of the rent, can they expect the SSI monthly payment to go down?
It's an excellent question. If a person has a housing voucher or other kinds of rental assistance funded by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, then the portion of their housing costs that are paid by the voucher or the rental assistance will not count as income, will not affect their SSI. All they'll be required to pay is their share of the cost. And if their share of the cost is zero, particularly, because their income is so low, then they will still be counted as having paid their share for housing, and they can still be eligible for the full SSI without reduction. Good question.
Good to know. What happens if a person qualifies for SSI in one state and then moves to another?
Okay. If you receive SSI in one state and then move to another, you will most likely still be eligible for SSI. SSI exists in every state. You should report your change of address, contact Social Security, make sure that they're familiar with the change of residence. And if you changed your bank account, which often happens if you move to a different state, you need to be sure that Social Security knows the correct information for your new bank account, since that's the account you want to have your SSI direct deposited into. Now, there are some differences if you move from Maryland to certain other states. There are 9 of them. The closest one is Virginia. States where being eligible for SSI does not make you automatically eligible for Medicaid. As I mentioned, Virginia is one of 9 states where that's the case. The other 41 states and DC, if you live there and you get SSI, you automatically get Medicaid. But in Virginia and 8 other states, if you move there and you get SSI, you have to apply separately for Medicaid. And in each of those states, there's at least one criterion to be eligible for Medicaid that's more restrictive than the criteria to be eligible for SSI. Like, for example, the resource limit might be less than $2,000. But aside from that, there's really not much difference. Oh, I should mention one other thing. Some states on the flip side have more advantageous SSI systems. And that means if you move to certain states, New York and California are 2 examples, you could actually get more than $994 a month SSI. $994 a month is the maximum federally funded SSI benefit, but several states supplement that with a state allocation. In state of New York, for example, the maximum SSI benefit currently is $1,081 a month because New York contributes an extra $87 a month of state funding to supplement the $994 of federal funding for SSI.
Okay. If an individual is still on their parents' insurance and has Medicaid, can they use both?
They can. I'm so glad the questioner asked that. If Medicaid is the sole insurance, then it provides comprehensive coverage, as I mentioned earlier. However, if a person can have other insurance and Medicaid at the same time, Medicaid is always the insurer of last resort. That will always pay last. But it can supplement other insurance. Could supplement private insurance. It can supplement Medicare. In the case of private insurance, person has private insurance and Medicaid. Their private insurance would be billed for services first and then Medicaid. And if the healthcare provider accepts both the private insurance and the Medicaid may be able to help cover costs like deductibles and co-insurance that the primary insurance did not cover. In the state of Maryland, if a person has both Medicare and Medicaid, because Maryland has a very generous rule where this is concerned, the Medicaid wipes out virtually all of the out-of-pocket costs for Medicare, except generally a limited copay for prescriptions. So it can make your Medicare essentially free.
Okay. This one, I think, again, there's some confusion about between SSDI and SSI. I've read through it a couple of times, so I hope I have it correct. It looks like an individual applied for SSDI and was denied. They talked to a Social Security representative at the resource fair the other day on Sunday, I'm assuming, and they were told that they were not eligible because at age 25 they had never worked, so they didn't put in enough time to be eligible for SSDI. They're wondering if they should appeal that or should they apply for SSI directly.
Okay. It's a great question. I would say probably both. First, let me explain the difference between SSI and SSDI. In the couple of minutes that we have left, I'll try to do that and answer the question. So, SSI, supplemental security income, is for people with severe disabilities who have low income and low resources. SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance, is for people with severe disabilities. The same disability criteria apply to SSDI as to SSI. But rather than not having much money, the reason you qualify for SSDI is that you've worked and paid Social Security taxes on your earnings for a long enough period. Or in some cases, you are the adult child, age 18 or older, of a parent who worked and paid Social Security taxes, and the parent is now getting Social Security retirement or Social Security disability, SSDI, or the parent is deceased. In that case, the son or daughter can get SSDI based on the parent's work history. So SSDI is an insurance program based on the person with a disability, or in some cases, their parent, having worked and paid Social Security taxes. Paying Social Security tax is like paying your insurance premiums. Then you can qualify for SSDI. It is another cash benefit from Social Security based on disability. Now, a person could start out on SSI and then work and pay Social Security taxes on their earnings long enough to eventually qualify for SSDI. They can then be switched from SSI to SSDI. For most people, SSDI pays more, not always. The amount is based on a formula that starts with the person's average lifetime monthly earnings. So the higher your average earnings, the higher your benefit. But on average, SSDI pays more than SSI. SSDI has work incentives just like SSI, but they're very different. That's the subject of a different webinar we've done before. PCR has hosted before. Perhaps they'll want to repeat that at some point. But to get back to the question, if a person applied for SSDI and they were denied because they didn't have sufficient earnings history, then they could appeal that if, in fact, Social Security was not aware of their complete earnings history. In fact, they did have enough work history to qualify, or they could simply apply for SSI. And if the only reason they were denied SSDI was they hadn't worked enough, but their income and their resources are low, then they would likely be eligible for SSI. How much do you need? How much of a work history do you need to qualify for SSDI? depends on your age, but somebody who's under age 24 could be working less than a year and a half and potentially have enough work to qualify. All right. So I guess we should stop now. It's a couple minutes after 8:30. Um, but I'm happy to answer the remaining questions. And if the Spanish interpreter would not mind staying on with the family that asked the question about how much income the family could have and have the child still be eligible for SSI, we can cover that.
Okay, great. Thank you again, Michael. I'm also going to put a poll in the chat for everybody to answer just regarding the webinar. So I'm going to launch that right now. So if you could fill that out, I really appreciate it. And then thank you, everyone. Again, thank you, Tunisia and Michael, for being here tonight. Looking ahead, our virtual transition times meeting will be held once a month from now until June. All meetings will continue to be offered with simultaneous ASL in Spanish and archived on the PCR website. Please join us next month on Wednesday, May 27th for the Social and Recreational Opportunities webinar. This will be a panel presentation offering a variety of recreation opportunities for your loved one in and around Montgomery County. Come hear what your favorite organizations are offering for the spring and summer. Thank you so much, Michael.